Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with you. When I was a junior in college, I had the opportunity to write a book. And I had always loved reading, and that led to a love of writing, and eventually a love of speaking. And so I wrote this article for the Washington Post about the challenges that I faced going home as a low-income student. The obligations I had to send money back to help my family. I was helping my uncle apply for a job. That I was going back to a home with 2 bedrooms and 5 people. A small home that was in utter disrepair and had been for many years. And so when I received this invitation from the woman who's now my literary agent to write a book, I was at once excited about it, but very worried about what it would entail. That I would have to reveal so much about my own life and my personal experience and struggles that I'd faced, and that I would have to make myself vulnerable in ways that would be very uncomfortable. And now looking back on what writing this book has done for me and what it's given me an opportunity to do, I am so grateful for the experience because it's helped me understand that there really is power in vulnerability. That in embracing vulnerability, you really can build empathy and compassion. When I arrived at Williams as a freshman in 2014, I was this eager, very driven, intellectually ambitious student who wanted to be involved with everything. I joined like 7 clubs right away. I realized it was far too many. I was spread too thin. And I was so interested in discussing political, social, economic issues, philosophical subjects. One of the things I loved about Williams was that I really felt that I would be a priority to each of my teachers and professors, that I'd be able to develop meaningful, lasting relationships with them, and that they would help me grow and develop personally and intellectually. And so when I got there, I just took off in trying to explore the world of ideas. And I had so many rewarding conversations, but I noticed something pretty early on. And the thing I noticed was that most of my peers and most of my professors agreed with me on the most pressing issues of the day, whether it was affirmative action or welfare or social security or the role that the government should play in providing opportunity for those who don't have it. And I thought to myself, if I really wanted to grow intellectually, if I really wanted to develop a deeper understanding of humanity and of our world, and if I wanted to be prepared to go out into the world and be a change agent and advocate for the values that I believe in, I needed to engage with views that I deeply disagreed with. And so that led to me looking for opportunities to spark difficult conversations, to have difficult discussions about sensitive topics, issues of race and class and gender, even climate change. And there was a group on campus called Uncomfortable Learning. And I just loved the name. It sounded like it totally fit for me. And so I went to an Uncomfortable Learning conversation. A scholar, Harvard Law professor named Randall Kennedy was there speaking. I was sitting in the front row, paying attention very intently, asked these questions afterwards, got to talk to him. And the president of Uncomfortable Learning then told me, "Zach, you should join this club. You should be a part of this." And I was ecstatic. I loved it. I joined, I started playing a role, helping the club advertise for speakers, select speakers, coordinate and arrange events. And I began to notice that this work was actually very controversial, because the main mission of Uncomfortable Learning was to invite speakers to campus whom I personally disagreed with. Speakers whose very views and values challenged everything that I thought I stood for, challenged the very way in which I hoped to exist and succeed and excel at Williams. And so this, for me, in some sense, was just a further evolution of a journey of uncomfortable learning throughout my life. It started when I was 3, when my parents got divorced. When I was 10, my mother was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And growing up with a mother who had a mental illness meant that from an early age, I had to be very conscientious and very self-aware and very careful. It meant that I constantly had to assess the way in which I was engaged with her and interacting with her. Did she feel loved and cared for enough? And on days when she would have mood swings and paranoid delusions, her rage was terrifying. It would turn our house into a minefield. And so this cultivated in me very early on a sense of empathy and compassion that I'm very grateful to have now, but was very difficult then, because at 6 or 7 years old, you don't really know what schizophrenia means. All you're trying to understand is, why is my mother so angry? I've done nothing wrong. Why can't I have the loving, encouraging, supportive relationship with my mom that every child desires? But my mother taught me so many important lessons throughout my life. I grew up in a family of educators. My grandmother taught in Detroit public schools for 42 years. She started teaching me how to read when I was 3, and by the time I was 5, I loved books and I loved reading. And my mother always placed this incredible value on my education. She told me that knowledge was power, that self-understanding was so important, that empathy was important, that you should question your own assumptions, that you should rethink your firmly held beliefs. And so when I was in 4th grade, she decided that the education that I was receiving in a Detroit public school that was under-resourced and underfunded, in which teachers were doing their very best but were faced with many challenges, was not the kind of education that she wanted me to receive. So very quickly, she enrolled me in an elite private school in an affluent suburb outside of Detroit. And it was like a complete culture shock. Shook my worldview. My peers lived in these palatial mansions. They were traveling to China and Prague and Hong Kong and Aspen for spring break and winter break. And I'd never been out of the country. This was another instance of uncomfortable learning throughout my life. And I give my mother a lot of credit for telling me that it would be very important in these circumstances in which I faced racial stereotypes, implicit assumptions, things that were both subtle and overt, to try to demonstrate that I deserved to be there through setting an example, through being alert, through being a diligent student, through being patient, through being well-mannered, through being thoughtful. And she always emphasized asking people questions that will tell you more about them so that you can then gain a deeper understanding of who they are. She thought that if I took this approach in my interactions with teachers and professors, that I would be able to take this knowledge with me throughout my life, and that I would be better and able to go out into the world one day and make a positive difference. I took this with me to Williams. And when I got there, there was so much that I wanted to do, so many things that I wanted to explore. Yet, at the same time, there were still so many things in my past, my relationship with my mother, that were unresolved. And so 3 things really helped me, 3 lessons that I was able to distill from looking back at various experiences throughout my life. One was gratitude for having a mother who cared about my education, for having a father who worked 3 jobs just to make sure that I could attend a private school, just so that he could pay the remainder of the tuition that wasn't covered by my scholarship. Another was resilience, seeing how hard he worked, seeing how hard people worked in the community that I grew up in, seeing people waking up at 4:50 in the morning just to go to work so that they could provide for their family. The third lesson was humility. Recognizing that no matter how much I read, no matter how much I learned, no matter how enthusiastic or eager I was to have a particular conversation, that there was always something I could learn from the perspectives of others. I didn't fully appreciate all of this as a freshman. But in writing this book, I had to reflect long and hard on my own experiences, on what they mean to me, and on how they might enable me to better communicate this message and to connect with others. And so when I look back and I think about where I was as a freshman, I hope that my book will inspire others to believe in the possibility that at a time in which our country is so deeply divided, we might find it worthwhile to step outside of our comfort zones, to engage with people we disagree with, even on the values and views that matter most to us. And that in doing so, it might be arduous, progress might be slow, but that it can be worth it. That we can gain a deeper understanding of the obstacles that stand in the way of the progress we hope to achieve. That we can gain a deeper understanding of where we stand, firmer in our own conclusions. And that when we go out into the world, whether it's in a job interview or in a meeting, if you hear someone say something that you find disturbing or offensive, that you won't feel as though your only recourse is to remove yourself from the situation, but rather you can articulate those differences of opinion. You can stand up for yourself. You can feel confident. You can excel and you can succeed. I believe that if we take this approach, that if we embrace a sense of open-mindedness thoughtfully and tactfully, we can come together and build a better future. Thank you.